when 58-year-old goat herder Inday Mamay chased her escaped goat into a forbidden ravine, she expected nothing more than a difficult afternoon. Instead, she discovered a moss-covered vault containing her great-grandfather's revolutionary journal, and proof that her ancestor was betrayed and erased from history by the very families who now rule her village. What begins as one invisible woman's accidental discovery explodes into a dangerous fight against corrupt officials and powerful developers who will do anything, including arson and death threats, to keep the truth buried alongside the unmarked graves of forgotten heroes. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Marcus's hand trembled as Inday pulled her phone from her pocket. One of her few concessions to modernity, kept mainly for emergency calls to her children, who rarely answered. She activated the flashlight, and the beam cut through the darkness of the vault, revealing what centuries had hidden. The space was smaller than her bedroom, but densely packed with the carefully preserved detritus of revolution. Inday stepped. Inside, her calloused feet finding purchase on stone that had known no footsteps for generations. The air smelled of earth and metal and something else, the peculiar mustiness of paper that had somehow survived in this mountain womb. Her hands moved methodically, unwrapping the first oilcloth bundle with the same care she used when birthing kids from struggling mother goats. The fabric crumbled at her touch, but inside, preserved documents lay flat and remarkably intact. Spanish script crawled across yellowed pages like the tracks of careful insects. She couldn't read the language of colonizers, but she recognized dates: 1896, 1897, 1898, the years of revolution she'd learned about in her 3 years of elementary school before her father pulled her out to help with the farm. Beneath the Spanish documents, she found papers in Tagalog, written in the old script her grandmother had used for marking herb bundles. These she could puzzle through, slowly. They were letters, declarations, strategic plans. Names repeated. Across the pages, names that meant nothing to her except one. Inday Mamay, her surname, her family name, the name her son Dante had legally erased, embarrassed by its provincial ring, replacing it with the more respectable Fernandez. Inday's breath caught. She set down the documents and reached for another bundle, this one wrapped in what appeared to be old leather. Inside, a journal, its pages covered in tight handwriting. The first page bore an inscription, "Ang talaarawan ni Lakan Mamay para sa aking mga anak na hindi ko makikita, the journal of Lakan Mamay for my children I will never see." She sat down hard on the stone floor, heedless of the damp seeping through her worn skirt. This man, this Lakan Mamay, had written these words knowing he would die, and somehow, impossibly, they had reached her. With shaking fingers, she began photographing pages. Her phone's camera struggled in the dim light, but she adjusted, angling the flashlight, making sure each image captured the text clearly. She didn't understand why she was doing this, only that these words needed to be preserved beyond this vault, beyond her memory. Among the artifacts, she found weapons. Bolos with rusted blades, a rifle that must have been cutting-edge technology in its time, now corroded but still recognizable. Clay jars held what might have been gunpowder once. A wooden chest contained medals and insignia she didn't recognize, but it was the map that made her hands shake so badly she nearly dropped her phone, rolled carefully and stored in a metal tube that had protected it from humidity. The map showed the mountain range she'd lived in all her life. But this version was marked with X's, dozens of them scattered across the peaks and valleys. Beside each X, notes in old script. She could make out some words: nakabaon, buried; hindi nakikita, unseen; mga bayani, heroes, burial sites. These were burial sites. The revolutionaries who had died, whose deaths had been recorded in sanitized history books as abstract casualties, were here, in her mountains, in unmarked graves that the jungle had reclaimed. Men and women who had fought for freedom, dumped in secret holes and forgotten. She thought of her grandmother, who had lived to 93 and died when Inday was 25. The old woman had been stern, silent about family history. When young Inday had asked about their ancestors, her grandmother's face had closed like a door slamming. Ang nakaraan ay silid na nakakandado para sa mabuting dahilan, she would say. The past is a locked room for good reason. Now, sitting in this vault with evidence of erased history surrounding her, Inday understood. Her grandmother's silence hadn't been indifference. It had been protection, terror kept quiet, memory imprisoned by fear. How many families had done the same? How many stories had died with the last person brave enough or foolish enough to remember? She found the letter tucked into the journals, back-binding, its edges carefully preserved between the leather pages. It was addressed, "Sa aking mga apo," to my grandchildren. Inday read it 3 times, her eyes blurring with tears that surprised her. She hadn't cried in years. Tears were a luxury she couldn't afford when there were goats to feed and a life to survive. But these words, written by a man whose blood ran in her veins, a man who had died believing in a future he wouldn't see, these broke something open in her chest. He wrote of sacrifice, of knowing the fight would cost everything, of hoping that someday, when freedom finally came, his descendants would live visible lives, would walk without fear, would speak their truths openly. He wrote that he regretted nothing except not being there to see his family grow. "I am not afraid to die," he had written. "I am only afraid of being forgotten." Inday sat with that sentence for a long time. She had spent her entire adult life being invisible, to government officials who looked through her when she came to town, to her own children who sent money but rarely returned, to the broader world that had no use for aging mountain women who herded goats and knew the names of herbs. She had accepted that invisibility as the natural order of things, but her great-grandfather had died, fighting to be remembered. And someone, collaborators, enemies, the winners who wrote the history, had erased him anyway. She wasn't naive. She knew what this discovery meant. Documents like these didn't just rewrite history textbooks. They threatened the stories powerful families told about themselves. They challenged property claims and political legitimacy. They were dangerous in ways her simple life had never prepared her for. The afternoon light slanting through the vault entrance had shifted, warning her that hours had passed. She needed to leave before dark made the mountain paths treacherous. But every instinct screamed at her not to abandon this place unguarded. She photographed everything systematically. Each document, both sides of each page, the map from multiple angles, the artifacts, the journal entries she could reach. Her phone's storage filled rapidly, and she had to delete old photos of her goats to make room. It felt right somehow. Trading images of her daily life for this hidden history. When her phone's battery dropped to 20%, she forced herself to stop. Carefully, reverently, she rewrapped each item in its oilcloth, replaced everything exactly as she'd found it. She memorized the vault's layout, noting which shelf held what, creating a mental map of this repository of forgotten truth. Outside, Kidlet waited, chewing contentedly on mountain grass as though she hadn't just upended her owner's entire existence. Inday latched the vault door as securely as its broken lock allowed and began piling rocks and branches to camouflage the entrance. It wouldn't fool a determined searcher, but it might escape casual notice. The descent took twice as long as the climb, her mind churning. Should she tell someone? But who? The barangay captain was the mayor's cousin. The police? They answered to the same power structures that had erased Inday Mamay in the first place. Her children? Dante would tell her to leave well enough alone, to not invite trouble. Her daughters would worry and beg her to stay safe. Father Cruz, perhaps. The old priest had always been kind to her, and he'd lived in these mountains long enough to understand their secrets. But even as she thought it, she wondered if the church, which had played its own complicated role during colonization, could be trusted with this truth. By the time she reached her small stone house, the sun had set, painting the sky in shades of fire that reminded her of revolution. She secured Kidlat and the other goats, her hands moving through familiar tasks while her mind remained in that vault with those documents, with her great-grandfather's words. Inside, she plugged her phone into its charger and sat at her simple wooden table, scrolling through the photographs in the dim light of her single bulb. The images were grainy, imperfect, but readable. Evidence, proof, truth. She thought about her grandmother's warning about locked rooms and good reasons. She thought about her quiet life, her invisibility, her safety. She thought about Lakan Mamay writing to grandchildren he would never meet, hoping they would live free. She thought about being forgotten. Through her window she saw a vehicle's headlights on the road below, unusual for this late hour on a mountain track. A truck she didn't recognize, moving slowly as though the driver was searching for something or someone. Inday switched off her light and sat in darkness, her phone clutched in her hand. Lakan Mamay's words echoing in her mind. "I am only afraid of being forgotten." "You won't be," she whispered to the ghost of her great-grandfather, to the vault hidden in the mountains, to the buried heroes whose names she now carried. Not anymore. The truck's headlights swept past her house and continued up the mountain road. But Inday knew, with the certainty of someone who had just stepped across an invisible threshold, that her life of invisibility had ended. What came next, she couldn't imagine. But she knew, as surely as she knew these mountains, that she couldn't unknow what she'd discovered, couldn't unsee her great-grandfather's words, couldn't return to pretending that the past was safely locked away. The vault hadn't just held documents and artifacts, it had held her, waiting. And now, finally, she had been found. Marcus's hand trembled as Inday pulled her phone from her pocket, one of her few concessions to modernity, kept mainly for emergency calls to her children, who rarely answered. She activated the flashlight, and the beam cut through the darkness of the vault, revealing what centuries had hidden. The space was smaller than her bedroom, but densely packed with the carefully preserved detritus of revolution. Inday stepped inside, her calloused feet finding purchase on stone that had known no footsteps for generations. The air smelled of earth and metal and something else, the peculiar mustiness of paper that had somehow survived in this mountain womb. Her hands moved methodically, unwrapping the first oilcloth bundle with the same care she used when birthing kids from struggling mother goats. The fabric crumbled at her touch, but inside, preserved documents lay flat and remarkably intact. Spanish script crawled across yellowed pages. She couldn't read the language of colonizers, but she recognized dates: 1896, 1897, 1898, the years of revolution she'd learned about in her 3 years of elementary school. Beneath the Spanish documents, she found papers in Tagalog, written in the old script her grandmother had used. These she could puzzle through slowly. They were letters, declarations, strategic plans. Names repeated across the pages, names that meant nothing to her except one, Lakan Mamay, her surname. Her family name, the name her son Dante had legally erased, replacing it with the more respectable Fernandez. Inday's breath caught. She reached for another bundle, this one wrapped in old leather. Inside, a journal, its pages covered in tight handwriting. The first page bore an inscription, "Ang talaarawan ni Lakan Mamay, para sa aking mga anak na hindi ko makikita, the journal of Lakan Mamay, for my children I will never see." She sat down hard on the stone floor. This man, this Lakan Mamay, had written these words knowing he would die. And somehow, impossibly, they had reached her. With shaking fingers, she began photographing pages. Her phone's camera struggled in the dim light, but she adjusted, angling the flashlight, making sure each image captured the text clearly. She didn't understand why she was doing this. Only that these words needed to be preserved beyond this vault, beyond her memory. Among the artifacts, she found weapons, bolos with rusted blades, a rifle corroded but still recognizable. Clay jars held what might have been gunpowder once. A wooden chest contained medals and insignia she didn't recognize. But it was the map that made her hands shake so badly she nearly dropped her phone. Rolled carefully and stored in a metal tube, the map showed the mountain range she'd lived in all her life. But this version was marked with X's, dozens of them, scattered across the peaks and valleys. Beside each X, notes in old script. She could make out some words: nakabaon, buried, hindi nakikita, unseen, mga bayani heroes, burial sites. These were burial sites. The revolutionaries who had died were here, in her mountains, in unmarked graves that the jungle had reclaimed. Men and women who had fought for freedom, dumped in secret holes and forgotten. She thought of her grandmother, who had been stern, silent about family history. When young Inday had asked about their ancestors, her grandmother's face had closed like a door slamming. Ang nakaraan ay silid na nakakandado para sa mabuting dahilan, she would say. The past is a locked room for good reason. Now sitting in this vault, Inday understood. Her grandmother's silence hadn't been indifference. It had been protection. Terror kept quiet. Memory imprisoned by fear. She found the letter tucked into the journal's back binding. It was addressed sa aking mga apo, to my grandchildren. Inday read it 3 times, her eyes blurring with tears that surprised her. He wrote of sacrifice, of knowing the fight would cost everything, of hoping that someday his descendants would live visible lives, would walk without fear, would speak their truths openly. I am not afraid to die, he had written. I'm only afraid of being forgotten. Inday sat with that sentence for a long time. She had spent her entire adult life being invisible, to government officials who looked through her, to her own children who sent money but rarely returned. She had accepted that invisibility as the natural order of things, but her great-grandfather had died fighting to be remembered, and someone had erased him anyway. The afternoon light slanting through the vault entrance had shifted. She needed to leave before dark made the mountain paths treacherous. She photographed everything systematically, each document, the map from multiple angles, the journal entries she could reach. Her phone's storage filled rapidly, and she had to delete old photos of her goats to make room. When her phone's battery dropped to 20%, she forced herself to stop. Carefully, reverently, she rewrapped each item in its oilcloth, replaced everything exactly as she'd found it. She memorized the vault's layout, creating a mental map of this repository of forgotten truth. Outside, Kidlet waited, chewing contentedly on mountain grass. Inday latched the vault door as securely as its broken lock allowed and began piling rocks and branches to camouflage the entrance. The descent took twice as long as the climb, her mind churning. Should she tell someone, but who? The barangay captain was the mayor's cousin. The police answered to the same power structures that had erased Inday Mamay in the first place. By the time she reached her small stone house, the sun had set. She secured Kidlet and the other goats, her hands moving through familiar tasks while her mind remained in that vault. Inside, she plugged her phone into its charger and sat at her simple wooden table, scrolling through the photographs. The images were grainy, imperfect, but readable. Evidence, proof, truth. Through her window, she saw a vehicle's headlights on the road below, unusual for this late hour. A truck she didn't recognize, moving slowly, as though the driver was searching for something. Inday switched off her light and sat in darkness, her phone clutched in her hand. Lakan Mame's words echoing in her mind. I am only afraid of being forgotten. You won't be, she whispered. Not anymore. The truck's headlights swept past her house and continued up the mountain road. But Inday knew her life of invisibility had ended. 2 days after the discovery, Inday was still wrestling with what to do when she heard a vehicle struggling up the steep track to her house. Visitors were rare enough to be concerning. Two men emerged from a dusty sedan, one tall and bookish in wire-rimmed glasses, the other younger with a camera bag slung over his shoulder. The older one approached with careful respect, waiting at a polite distance until she acknowledged them. Magandang hapon po, Inday Mamay. He used the honorific that city people rarely bothered with. My name is Rafael Salcedo. I'm a researcher from the University of the Philippines. This is my brother JP. We've been interviewing elders in the area about local history. And someone in the village mentioned your grandmother might have known stories about the revolution. Inday studied them. The older brother had the earnest intensity of someone who cared too much about things that didn't pay. The younger one was already filming casually, which set her nerves on edge. My grandmother died many years ago, she said carefully. She didn't talk much about the past. That's actually common, Raphael said, pulling out a worn notebook. Many families went silent after the revolution. There were reprisals against sympathizers, and the collaborators rewrote themselves as heroes. Entire communities learned that remembering the truth was dangerous. Something in his tone made her reconsider. She gestured toward her small porch. Would you like some tea? Over cups of mountain herb tea, Raphael explained his research. He was writing his dissertation on historical erasure, how certain revolutionary heroes had been deliberately written out of official records by families who had actually collaborated with the Spanish. There's a pattern, he said, his voice gaining intensity. Wherever I find gaps in the historical record, I find the same surnames appearing in the new narrative. The Valenzuelas, for instance, our current mayor's family. They claim his great-grandfather was a revolutionary hero, but every primary source that could verify that has mysteriously vanished. Inday's pulse quickened.
What do you know about Inday Mamay?
Raphael's eyes widened. You know that name? He's one of the ghost heroes I've been researching. There are references to him in oral histories from other provinces. Descriptions of a leader who organized mountain communities for the revolution. But here, in his own region, there's nothing. No records, no monument, no mention. It's as if he never existed. What if he did exist? Inday asked quietly. What if there was proof? The brothers exchanged glances. JP lowered his camera. Raphael leaned forward, barely breathing. What kind of proof? Inday made her decision. She pulled out her phone and showed them the photographs. Raphael's hands shook as he scrolled through the images. His professional composure crumbled. These are primary sources, original documents. This journal, do you understand what this is? This is a revolutionary leader's personal account. These could rewrite our understanding of the entire regional movement. There's more, Inday said. The map shows burial locations, unmarked graves throughout the mountains, sacred sites, Raphael breathed. If those locations can be verified, they'd qualify for heritage protection. They could halt any development on that land. JP looked up sharply. Development? You mean like the resort project the mayor's been pushing? What resort? Inday asked. Big news in the village, JP said. Mayor's partnered with some Singapore developers. They're planning a mountain eco-resort, supposed to bring jobs and tourism. Groundbreaking is scheduled for next month. Raphael's face had gone pale.
Where?
Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The Highlands. Same area where... JP stopped, understanding dawning. The same area where those burial sites would be. Can you take us to the vault? Raphael asked Inday. She hesitated. Once she showed them, there would be no going back. The secret would spread beyond her control, but Inday Mamay's words echoed in her mind. I'm only afraid of being forgotten. Tomorrow morning, she said, before dawn. And you follow my rules. Respect for the site. No removing anything without proper procedure, and discretion about the location. Agreed, Raphael said immediately. JP nodded, then asked, Can I document this? For a film? Why? Because stories like this matter. Because if this is real, if powerful people are trying to bury it, then having video evidence might protect everyone involved. When something's online, it's harder to make it disappear. Inday thought about the truck that had prowled past her house. about her grandmother's fearful silence, about all the ways truth could be buried. "You can film," she said, "but I decide what gets shared and when." They shook on it, a mountain woman, an academic, and a filmmaker forming an unlikely alliance. After they left, Inday stood on her porch, watching the sun set over the mountains that held her great-grandfather's secrets. Kidlet came to stand beside her, and Inday rested a hand on the goat's rough coat. "What have I started?" she whispered. Kidlet, as always, had no answer. But in the growing darkness, Inday felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the dangerous, exhilarating sensation of mattering. Tomorrow she would take them to the vault. Tomorrow, everything would change. She just hoped she was ready. They met at the pre-dawn hour when the mountains were still wrapped in mist. Raphael carried proper documentation equipment, archival gloves, a high-resolution camera, measurement tools. JP had his video gear. Inday brought Kidlet, who seemed to understand the gravity of the mission and walked with unusual docility. The climb took an hour. Neither brother was accustomed to mountain terrain, and they had to stop frequently. Inday used the pauses to teach them which plants to avoid, which stones were stable, how to read the mountain's moods. City people never looked at the ground properly. When they finally reached the camouflaged entrance, Raphael stood before it with the reverence of someone entering a cathedral. "Ready?" Inday asked. He nodded, unable to speak. Inside, she watched his professional mask crack completely. He moved through the vault like a man in a dream, carefully examining each item with gloved hands, while JP filmed everything and Inday provided light. "This is extraordinary," Raphael murmured, opening the journal with infinite care. The handwriting, the paper quality, the binding, all consistent with the period. And the content. He began reading aloud, translating passages from the old Tagalog. "Tonight we meet with the others to finalize our plans. Teodoro Valenzuela has assured us of his support, bringing weapons from his contacts in Manila. I trust him as I trust my own brothers. Together, we will drive the oppressors from our land." Raphael looked up, his face grim. "The current mayor's great-grandfather. He's named here as an ally." He flipped forward several pages. "We have been betrayed. Teodoro led us into an ambush. Half our force is captured or dead. Those who escaped scatter through the mountains. I must hide these records before they find me. Let them serve as testimony when I cannot." The vault fell silent except for JP's camera whir. He documented his own betrayal, JP said quietly. He knew he was going to die, so he preserved the evidence. Raphael pulled out the map, spreading it carefully on a flat surface. Using GPS on his phone, he began cross-referencing the marked locations with modern coordinates. These burial sites, if they're accurate, fall across 3 different property parcels. 2 are government forest land, but this cluster here, he pointed to a concentration of X marks. This is right where the resort is planned. So if these graves are verified, Inday began, heritage site designation, mandatory archaeological survey. Construction would be halted indefinitely. Raphael's voice carried both triumph and worry. And the mayor's family history would be exposed as a lie built on collaboration and murder. "We need to document everything," JP said, already adjusting camera angles. "Every page, every artifact, every detail. Multiple copies stored in different locations. They worked for hours." Raphael meticulously catalogued each item while explaining its historical significance. JP captured high-resolution footage. Inday, who had expected to feel peripheral to this academic process, found herself essential. She could read the old Tagalog better than Raphael. Her familiarity with mountain geography helped locate the burial sites on modern maps, and her knowledge of local families provided context for names in the documents. "This isn't just history," Raphael explained as they worked. "Under Philippine law, discovering unprotected heritage sites triggers automatic preservation protocols. I'll need to file a report with the National Historical Commission. That starts an official process that legally protects the site during investigation." "How long does that take?" Inday asked. "Months, usually. But politically sensitive cases can take years." "We don't have years," JP said. "The resort breaks ground next month." Raphael pulled out a sealed letter they'd found tucked behind Lakan Mamay's journal. The wax seal was still intact. Should we open this? Inday studied the seal, a simple mountain flower, the kind her grandmother had grown behind her house. Yes, but carefully. Raphael eased the seal open. Inside was a single page, written in a flowing hand. "It's addressed to his family," Raphael said, voice thick with emotion. He began to read. "To those who come after, I write this knowing I will not see the morning. Know that we fought for a simple dream, that our children might live as free people, speaking their truths without fear. I do not regret my choices. I only regret that I will not know you, will not see what you become. Remember us. Remember that ordinary people can stand against empires. Remember that silence is also a choice. And remember that truth once spoken cannot be unspoken." It echoes. Inday felt tears on her cheeks. Across 100 years, her great-grandfather spoke directly to her about the choice she was making now, to speak or to remain silent. "We're being watched." They all turned. A woman stood at the vault entrance, backlit by morning sun. Maricel Dimaguiba, the municipal clerk. Inday recognized her from town, though they'd never spoken much. "Maricel," Raphael said carefully. "How did you—" "I followed you. The mayor's been asking questions about strangers interviewing elders. He knows something's happening." She looked at Inday. "I'm sorry. He's been monitoring vehicle traffic to the mountains. He'll know you've had visitors. Are you here to warn us or to report us?" Inday asked. Maricel's face was drawn with exhaustion. "I don't know yet. I've worked for the municipal office for 20 years. I've seen things. Documents that vanished, records that were altered. I've stayed quiet because I have 2 children to support and no other job options." She stepped fully into the vault, looking around. "But I've also known this place existed. My grandmother told me stories about the hidden vault where the truth was buried. You knew." Raphael's voice rose. "And you said nothing?" "What was I supposed to say? To whom? I had no proof, just an old woman's stories. And I was afraid." Maricel met Inday's eyes. "I'm still afraid. But seeing you, a woman your age with even more to lose, choosing to speak anyway." She pulled an envelope from her bag. "These are copies of the land sale documents. The mayor sold that highland parcel to Chen Development Corporation 3 months ago, pending final permits. The deal is worth millions. The burial grounds are on land he's already sold," JP said, understanding. "If we expose this, the sale becomes void. He loses the commission. His political ambitions collapse, and his family's reputation as revolutionary heroes is revealed as a fiction built on betrayal." Maricel handed the envelope to Raphael. "I could lose everything for giving you these." "Why are you?" Inday asked. "Because I'm tired of being afraid. Because my grandmother died, still afraid to speak the truth. Because I want my children to live in a place where history isn't a weapon used by powerful families to justify their power." Maricel's voice shook. "Because you're right. Truth once spoken echoes." Raphael carefully stored the envelope with the other documents. "This changes everything. With these sales records and the historical evidence, we have both the proof of erasure and the financial motive for continued suppression." "It also makes everyone involved a target," Maricel said quietly. "The mayor won't let this go easily. Neither will Chen. He's already invested millions based on those permits. They stood in the vault, 5 people, 3 humans, 1 goat, and the ghost of Lakan Mamay. At the moment where retreat was still possible but forward was the only direction that mattered. We document everything today," Raphael decided. "I'll file the preliminary report with the National Historical Commission tomorrow. That creates a legal shield. Once it's official, suppressing it becomes a federal crime. I'll start releasing footage online," JP added. "Not everything, not yet. But enough to establish a record. Enough that if something happens to the physical evidence, digital copies exist." Maricel nodded. "I'll make additional copies of the land documents. Store them with people the mayor can't reach." They all looked at Inday. This was her discovery. Her great-grandfather, her choice. She thought of her quiet life, her invisible existence, the safety of silence. Then she thought of Lakan Mamay writing his final letter by candlelight, hoping someone would remember. "We tell the truth," she said simply. All of it. Kidlat bleated agreement. They had just become revolutionaries. Mayor Teodoro Valenzuela arrived at Inday's house the next morning in his official vehicle, accompanied by 2 men in expensive suits. He smiled like a politician in an election year, all charm and calculated warmth. "Inday Mamay," he said, using her full name with exaggerated respect. "I hope I'm not disturbing you. I heard you've had some visitors from Manila." Inday continued feeding her goats, not looking up. "People come and go, researchers, I'm told. Asking about old stories." He stepped closer, his smile fixed. "I'm concerned about outsiders taking advantage of our community elders. These academics, they have their own agendas. They twist stories to fit their theories. My grandmother told me never to trust men who smile too much," Inday said mildly. The smile flickered. "I'm here as a friend, trying to protect you. There are rumors about some kind of discovery in the mountains. Historical items. If such things exist, they should be properly secured by authorities. For their protection. And who would these authorities be? The municipal office, of course. I could arrange for proper storage, proper compensation for the finder. Very generous compensation." His tone hardened slightly. "It would be unfortunate if something happened to valuable historical items because they weren't properly protected." Inday finally looked at him. In his expensive shoes, his tailored barong, his confident posture, she saw everything her great-grandfather had fought against. Power built on lies, maintained through intimidation. "I appreciate your concern, Mayor, but I'm just a simple goat herder. I don't know about any historical discoveries." His eyes went cold. "Inday, I've always respected the mountain people, but respect goes both ways. Some things are better left buried. For everyone's safety." After he left, Inday walked to the village church. Father Domingo Cruz was arranging flowers on the altar when she entered. He looked up, immediately sensing her distress. "Inday, come, sit." In the quiet sanctuary, she told him everything. She expected caution, warnings about not making trouble. Instead, Father Cruz was quiet for a long moment, then said, "I've served this community for 30 years. I've watched good people stay silent about injustice because speaking up seemed too dangerous. I've participated in that silence." He met her eyes. "The church has its own complicated history with colonization. We tell ourselves we were victims too, but we also benefited from the power structures the colonizers created. We chose institutional survival over prophetic witness too many times. So what should I do?" "Tell the truth. The whole truth. And know that it will cost you." He smiled sadly. "But silence has its cost too. They're just harder to measure because they accumulate invisibly, generation after generation. Will you help us?" "Yes, use the church for your meetings. I'll provide what protection I can." He paused. "Though I should warn you, the mayor is a major donor. Speaking against him will have consequences for the parish. I don't want to cause you trouble." "Then you've already lost," Father Cruz said gently. "Truth always causes trouble for those invested in lies. The question is whether the trouble is worth it." That evening, Raphael called her phone. "I've filed the preliminary report. The National Historical Commission is treating it as a priority case because of the burial grounds. They're sending an investigator. That's good news. Maybe. I also received a call from my department head. Someone, he wouldn't say who, has questioned the legitimacy of my research. They're suggesting my dissertation committee needs to review my methods. They're threatening your career. It appears so. But Inday, I've been working toward this moment my entire academic life, finding primary sources that prove what I've always suspected. This is bigger than my dissertation." Late that night, Inday was woken by the sound of splintering wood. She rushed outside to find 3 men in dark clothes, destroying her fence, letting her goats scatter into the darkness. They didn't speak, didn't acknowledge her, just methodically tore apart the fence she'd maintained for 15 years. On the broken gate, they left a note. Accidents happen in the mountains to people who don't mind their business. She stood in her yard, watching her goats disappear into the darkness, and felt something cold settle in her chest. Not fear exactly, something harder. She called Raphael, then Maricel, then, for the first time in 3 years, she called her eldest son. Dante, it's your mother. Ma, it's 3 in the morning. Is everything okay? No, she said. I need your help. The line was quiet. Then I'll be there tomorrow. She spent the rest of the night gathering her goats, including Kidlat, who appeared from the darkness as if summoned. As dawn broke over the mountains, Inday understood that her quiet life was truly over. The fight had begun. Dante arrived the next afternoon, driving too fast up the mountain road in his leased sedan. He emerged wearing Manila business casual, pressed slacks and a polo shirt that looked absurd against the rural landscape. His eyes immediately went to the destroyed fence. Massa, what's going on? Your message said you needed help, but not with what? Come inside. There are people you need to meet. The church rectory had become their unofficial headquarters. When Dante entered, he found his mother seated at a table with Father Cruz, Raphael, JP, and Maricel, plus an elderly woman he didn't recognize. This is Lola Celia, Inday introduced. She's 97. She remembers stories about Lakan Mamay, our ancestor, Dante said flatly. The name I legally removed from my documents. Yes, Raphael explained everything. The vault, the documents, the burial sites, the mayor's threats. JP showed footage of the discoveries. As the story unfolded, Dante's expression shifted from skepticism to disbelief to something like shame. Why didn't you call me immediately when you found this? He demanded. Because I thought you'd tell me to leave it alone, to not make trouble, to remember my place. Inday's voice was gentle but firm. Was I wrong? Dante opened his mouth and closed it. After a long moment, he said, no, you weren't wrong. 3 days ago, I would have said exactly that. I would have said your safety was more important than old documents, that you should take whatever money the mayor offered and forget about it. And now I'm wondering why I've spent 10 years paying to erase a name that belonged to a man who died fighting for something he believed in, just so I could pretend to be someone I'm not. He looked at the photographs spread across the table. I'm ashamed it took my mother being threatened for me to care about my own history. Lola Celia spoke for the first time, her voice surprisingly strong. Your great-great-grandfather was my grandmother's cousin. I was 7 years old when she died, but I remember her stories. She told me about the night the Spanish soldiers came with Filipino collaborators leading them. She told me how they dragged the revolutionaries from their homes. She told me the name of the traitor, Teodoro Valenzuela, the current mayor's great-grandfather, Raphael confirmed. She told me where they buried the bodies, Lola Celia continued. Secret graves throughout the mountains, so the families couldn't honor their dead. She made me memorize the locations because she said someday someone would need to know. I've carried those locations in my head for 90 years, too afraid to speak them aloud. Will you speak them now? Inday asked. Yes. Before I die, the truth will be told. A knock at the door interrupted them. Father Cruz answered, returning with a professional-looking woman in her 40s, carrying an official briefcase. Agent Linda Mercado, National Historical Commission. She introduced herself. I'm here to investigate the reported discovery. She looked at Inday. You're the finder. Yes, I'll need to see the site. But first I should warn you, I've already encountered obstruction. The municipal office claims to have no records of the land parcels in question. Property maps are mysteriously unavailable. Someone is trying to slow my investigation. Maricel pulled out her copied documents. I have the real records, including the land sale to ChangedEverything Corporation. Agent Mercado examined them carefully. These show the mayor sold protected forest land to a private... I've been recording everything, JP said. I can have a short documentary cut by tomorrow, posted online before the town hall so people come informed. Father Cruz leaned back in his chair. The town hall will be a confrontation. The mayor will try to discredit all of you. He'll have supporters in the crowd, people whose livelihoods depend on that resort project. This won't be easy. When is truth ever easy? Inday said quietly. They spent the rest of the day preparing. Agent Mercado and Lola Celia went to verify burial locations, taking photographs and GPS coordinates. Raphael prepared his academic presentation, organizing documents chronologically. JP edited his footage into a 15-minute documentary that told the story simply and powerfully. Maricel made additional copies of all documents, storing them with trusted friends beyond the mayor's reach. Dante worked his phone, calling Manila contacts, journalists, lawyers, even a congressman he'd once cold-called for business. My mother discovered evidence of historical crimes and government corruption, he told each one, voice growing stronger with repetition. I need you to care about this. As evening fell, the unlikely coalition sat together in the rectory, sharing a simple meal Father Cruz had prepared. They were exhausted but also energized by a shared purpose. Whatever happens tomorrow, Raphael said, we've already accomplished something. We've recovered a lost voice. We've verified burial sites. We've documented suppressed history. That can't be undone, but it can still be buried, Maricel said quietly. I've seen how power works in this place. The mayor has connections all the way to Manila, and development has Singapore money backing them. She gestured around the table. An old woman, a goat herder, a priest, a clerk, 2 academics and a businessman who's ashamed of his name. You forgot the goat, JP said, and they all laughed despite themselves. Kidlet, sleeping in the corner, opened one eye as if acknowledging her role. That's all revolutions are, Lola Celia said. Ordinary people deciding that enough is enough. Your great-great-grandfather wasn't a general or a politician. He was a farmer who decided that freedom mattered more than safety. That's the only kind of courage there is. Ordinary people doing extraordinary things because someone must. Inday looked around the table at faces that had been strangers days ago. Her son, returning to a heritage he'd fled. The priest, risking his parish. The clerk who'd given up her livelihood. The academics willing to sacrifice their careers. The elder finally speaking what she'd held silent for a lifetime. Tomorrow, she said, we tell the truth. All of it, and whatever comes after, we face together. They raised their water glasses in a makeshift toast, to truth, to justice, to ordinary courage, and to one stubborn goat who'd started everything by refusing to stay penned. The community center overflowed with people. Every seat was taken, with villagers standing along the walls and crowding the doorway. JP had live-streamed his documentary that morning. It already had 50,000 views and was climbing. Local news vans lined the street outside. Mayor Valenzuela sat on the raised platform, Victor Chen beside him in an expensive suit. Behind them stood municipal officials and several men Inday didn't recognize. Manila lawyers, probably. The mayor's smile was confident, but his eyes were hard. Father Cruz led their group to seats near the front. Inday felt the weight of stares, some curious, some hostile, some sympathetic. She wore her simple best dress, the one she saved for church. Beside her, Lola Celia sat straight back despite her years, traditional mountain dress worn like armor. The mayor called the meeting to order. Thank you all for coming. I know there's been much talk lately. Much confusion spread by outsiders who don't understand our community. I'm here tonight to set the record straight. He gestured expansively. For years, I've worked to bring development to our region. Good jobs, economic opportunity, a future for our young people so they don't have to leave for Manila. The Mountain Resort Project represents 50 million pesos in investment, hundreds of jobs, and recognition for our beautiful highlands. Murmurs of approval from the crowd. Inday recognized some faces, people who worked in the municipal office, owners of businesses that would benefit from tourist traffic, families struggling to survive. But recently, the mayor continued, his voice hardening. Some people have tried to stop this progress with wild claims about historical sites, dramatic stories about secret vaults and buried revolutionaries. He smiled indulgently. Now I respect our history. My own great-grandfather was a hero of the revolution. But these particular claims are questionable at best, fabrications at worst, he pointed at Raphael. This man is a graduate student from Manila. He came here looking for evidence to support his academic theories. When he couldn't find what he wanted, he appears to have created it. And he found willing accomplices in some of our community members who, through no fault of their own, don't have the education to recognize manipulation. The implication was clear. Inday was too simple to understand she'd been used. Rage flared in her chest, but she stayed seated. Not yet. Furthermore, the mayor said, even if there were historical artifacts in the mountains, and I'm not conceding there are, the appropriate response would be for the municipal government to secure them properly. Not for outsiders and misguided locals to make wild accusations and spread rumors that damage our economic development. Victor Chen stood. I represent Chen Development Corporation. We've invested significant resources in this project based on proper permits and legal procedures. These last-minute attempts to derail development with unverified historical claims appear to be nothing more than extortion. We will pursue legal action against anyone making false statements that damage our business interests. The threat hung in the air. Sue us and we'll destroy you financially. Now, the mayor said, I'm happy to answer reasonable questions. Father Cruz stood. Mayor, if there's nothing to these claims, why not allow the National Historical Commission to complete its investigation? Father, we welcome legitimate investigation, but we can't halt economic development every time someone claims to have found something. The process must be balanced. Agent Mercado rose. I'm Linda Mercado from the National Historical Commission. My investigation has already verified several burial sites matching locations described in oral histories. Preliminary dating of materials from the vault confirms they're from the Revolutionary period. This isn't speculation. It's documented fact. With respect, the mayor said smoothly, your investigation hasn't been completed. And I've heard concerns about your methodology. Concerns from whom? Agent Mercado interrupted. From you? From the people whose land sale becomes void if these sites are protected. The crowd stirred. This was more confrontation than most town halls provided. Raphael stood next. I'd like to present evidence. He pulled up his laptop, connecting to the projector. Images of the vault's contents filled the screen. Documents, artifacts, the journal pages. These are primary historical sources. Original documents from the Revolutionary period. They tell a story that's been suppressed for over a century. He clicked through images. This journal belonged to Lakan Mamay, a revolutionary leader who organized mountain communities for the independence movement. These entries document his activities, his allies, and ultimately his betrayal. He paused on a translated passage. On this page, written days before his execution, Lakan Mamay names his betrayer, Teodoro Valenzuela, the mayor's great-grandfather. He describes how Valenzuela led revolutionaries into a Spanish ambush in exchange for land and position. The crowd erupted. Voices shouted over each other, some in disbelief, some in anger, some demanding to see more. This is outrageous, the mayor shouted. These documents could be forged. This is character assassination of my family. Then let independent experts examine them, Raphael shot back. Let historians verify them. If they're fake, that will be proven. But if they're real, your family's legacy is built on a lie. Lola Celia rose slowly. The room quieted out of respect for her age. I am 97 years old, she began, her voice carrying surprising strength. I am the oldest living person from these mountains. My grandmother was alive during the revolution. She told me stories when I was a child, stories I've held silent for 90 years because speaking them was dangerous. She looked directly at the mayor. Your great-grandfather was a traitor. He sold out his fellow Filipinos to save himself. After the revolution, he rewrote his history, claiming credit for heroism that belonged to the men he murdered. And your family has maintained that lie ever since, using it to justify your power, your land, your position. You can't prove any of this, the mayor said, but his voice had lost its confidence. I can prove where the bodies are buried, Lola Celia said. I've known my entire life. Secret graves throughout the mountains where your great-grandfather's victims were dumped like trash. Today I showed Agent Mercado those locations. She verified them. The dead testify, Mayor, even when the living are silenced. JP stood holding his camera. I've documented everything. The vault, the documents, the burial sites, oral testimony from elders. I've also documented the threats, the intimidation, the destruction of property. All of it is online now. Tens of thousands have seen it. You can't bury this anymore. Inday knew her moment had come. She stood, and the room fell silent. Here was the goat herder, the invisible mountain woman, claiming space at the center of power. My name is Inday Mamay, she said clearly. Lakan Mamay was my great-grandfather. I grew up not knowing this because my grandmother was too afraid to tell me. She died keeping his story locked inside, believing that silence would keep us safe. She pulled out a folded paper, Lakan Mamay's letter. Her hands shook, but her voice remained steady. These are his words, written the night before he died. She began to read. To those who come after, I write this knowing I will not see the morning. Know that we fought for a simple dream, that our children might live as free people, speaking their truths without fear. Her voice caught, but she continued. I do not regret my choices. I only regret that I will not know you, will not see what you become. Remember us. Remember that ordinary people can stand against empires. Remember that silence is also a choice. And remember that truth once spoken cannot be unspoken. It echoes. She looked up, tears on her cheeks, but steel in her voice. For 100 years, my great-grandfather's truth was silenced. For 100 years, collaborators pretended to be heroes. For 100 years, we were told to forget, to accept, to stay quiet. She looked directly at the mayor. I'm done being quiet. The truth echoes just like he promised. And you can't stop it anymore. The room exploded. Some cheering, some arguing, some demanding answers. The mayor tried to regain control, but the narrative had slipped from his grasp. The official story had cracked, and truth was flooding through. As the chaos swirled, Dante stood beside his mother. I'm proud to be Inday Mamay's son, he said loudly. I'm proud to be Lakan Mamay's descendant. I was ashamed of that name for years, but the only shame here belongs to those who built their power on lies and murder. Father Cruz spoke from his seat, his voice cutting through the noise. This community stands at a crossroads. We can continue building our future on falsified history, or we can face truth with courage. The choice will define us. The mayor, his face red with anger, pointed at Inday. You've made powerful enemies. You'll regret. Is that a threat, Mayor? Agent Mercado asked sharply. In front of witnesses, with cameras recording, Victor Chen stood abruptly. This meeting is pointless. Our lawyers will handle this. He and the mayor left the platform, pushing through the crowd toward the exit. But the crowd didn't disperse. Instead, something remarkable happened. An old man stood, someone Inday recognized from the market. My grandfather told me stories too, about revolutionaries buried in the mountains. I thought they were just legends. A woman raised her hand. My family lost land after the revolution. We were told the Spanish confiscated it, but my great-grandmother always said Filipinos stole it, not Spanish. One by one, people began speaking, stories held silent, suspicions never voiced, histories suppressed. The town hall had become a communal unburdening. As the meeting finally broke up near midnight, the coalition gathered outside. They were exhausted but also exhilarated. It's not over, Agent Mercado warned. The mayor will fight back. Chen will sue. This will get worse before it gets better. But we've shifted the ground, Raphael said. The official story is discredited. The evidence is public. That can't be undone. Inday stood apart from the group, looking at the mountains silhouetted against the night sky. Kidlat had somehow found her pressing against her leg. Dante joined her. Ma, you were incredible in there. I was terrified. That's what made it incredible. Being brave when you're terrified. That's the only kind of bravery there is. She smiled at him, recognizing her own words reflected back. Your great-great-grandfather would be proud. I think he'd be proudest of you. They stood together in the darkness. And for the first time in years, Inday felt her son truly saw her, not as an embarrassment to overcome, but as someone worth standing beside. The battle was far from over. But they had won something tonight that couldn't be taken back. They had spoken truth to power and survived. The retaliation came swiftly. At 3 in the morning, Inday woke to the smell of smoke and Kidlet's frantic bleating. She stumbled from her bed to find flames climbing the walls of her house, fed by gasoline poured along the foundation. She grabbed Kidlet and ran, barefoot across the rocky ground. Behind her, the house where she'd lived for 40 years burned like a torch in the darkness. Neighbors appeared with buckets and hoses, fighting the flames. By dawn, the fire was out, but half her house was destroyed. Everything she owned, her grandmother's things, her children's baby clothes, the simple treasures of a lifetime, was ash. The fire inspector arrived by mid-morning. Arson, he confirmed, showing her the gasoline traces. Someone wanted to send a message. They succeeded, Inday said quietly, staring at the ruins. Agent Mercado arrived within hours, bringing official protection and a paper trail. This is attempted murder. I'm filing federal charges and requesting police protection, but the attacks weren't finished. That afternoon, Maricel received a termination letter from the municipal office. Gross misconduct and unauthorized disclosure of confidential documents. She sat in Father Cruz's rectory, the letter trembling in her hands. 20 years, she whispered. 20 years of service, and they fired me by letter. Didn't even have the courage to face me. They're making an example of you, Raphael said grimly. He held his own bad news, an email from his department chair. Several donors have expressed concerns about my research methodology. The university is launching an ethics review. They're coming after all of us, JP said, scrolling through his phone. Someone's been mass reporting my videos for misinformation. The documentary's been taken down pending review. Dante paced the room, his phone pressed to his ear. When he hung up, his face was ashen. My company just lost its biggest client. They were told my family situation made me a liability. The coalition sat in stunned silence, the cost of their stand suddenly concrete and devastating. This is my fault, Inday said. I brought this on all of you. Don't, Maricel said sharply. I made my choice. We all did. But Inday could see the fear in their eyes, the doubt creeping in. They'd known intellectually that speaking truth would have consequences. Living those consequences was different. That evening, a Mercedes arrived at the ruins of Inday's house. Victor Chen emerged, immaculate and cold as winter. Mrs. Mamay, I'm sorry about your home. Terrible tragedy. You don't seem sorry. Actually, I am. I don't condone violence. He pulled an envelope from his jacket. I'm here to make you a final offer. 5 million pesos. You recant your claims. State publicly that you were mistaken about the historical significance of what you found, and sign a non-disclosure agreement. In exchange, I'll rebuild your house, compensate your allies for their losses, and ensure no further accidents occur. 5 million pesos. More money than she'd earn in 10 lifetimes. Enough to secure her daughter's futures, to ensure her grandchildren's education, to rebuild everything. And if I refuse, Chen's expression didn't change. Then I ensure your children lose their jobs. All of them. I have connections throughout Manila. One phone call and your son's career is finished. Your daughters find themselves blacklisted. Your grandchildren watch their parents struggle because their grandmother was stubborn. The threat wasn't subtle. It was precise and cruel. Strike at a mother through her children. You're asking me to betray my great-grandfather's memory for money. I'm asking you to be practical. He's been dead for a century. Your grandchildren are alive now. Which matters more? After he left, Inday sat among the ashes of her home and cried, not from fear but from exhaustion and doubt. Was she being selfish? Was her pride worth her children's suffering? The coalition gathered again that night, this time in the church sanctuary. No one spoke at first. The weight of their losses sat heavy among them. Finally, Dante broke the silence. Ma, I need to tell you something. Before I drove up here, I was ashamed of you. Ashamed of our name, our history, everything about where we came from. I built a whole life around pretending to be someone else. He looked at her, his eyes wet. "But watching you stand in that town hall, reading great-great-grandfather's letter, refusing to be silenced, I've never been more proud of anyone in my life. Yes, I might lose my job. Yes, this is costing me everything I built. But what I built was a lie. You're giving me a chance to build something true. My job is gone anyway," Maricel added. "But I feel freer than I have in 20 years. I don't have to pretend anymore, don't have to be complicit. That's worth something. My academic career might be over," Raphael said. "But I got to recover history that was lost. I got to give voice to forgotten heroes. Even if I never finished my dissertation, I did something that mattered." Lola Celia placed a weathered hand on Inday's shoulder. "Child, I'm 97 years old. I've lived my whole life afraid to speak what I knew. These last days, finally telling the truth, finally honoring my grandmother's stories. This is the first time I've felt truly alive in decades. Don't take that away from us by surrendering now," Father Cruz spoke from the altar. "I've been thinking about Christ in Gethsemane, asking for the cup to be taken away, hoping there might be another path, but ultimately choosing to continue despite the cost, because some truths are worth dying for." He smiled sadly. "I'm not comparing us to Christ. I'm just saying we all knew this would be hard. We chose it anyway." Agent Mercado stepped forward. "I have news. The National Historical Commission has issued emergency heritage protection for all documented burial sites. Construction cannot proceed until a full archaeological survey is completed. That's a legal order Chen cannot ignore without facing criminal charges." "How long will that take?" JP asked. "Months at minimum. Maybe years. And during that time, the sites are protected." She looked at Inday. "Your stand bought us time. Now we use it." Inday sat in the front pew, Kidlet curled at her feet. Around her gathered people who had sacrificed for a truth she'd uncovered. People who had chosen courage over comfort. "Chen threatened my children," she said quietly. "That's the weapon he knows will hurt most." Dante knelt before her. "Ma, I'm a grown man. I make my own choices. You don't get to sacrifice truth to protect me. That's my decision to make. And I choose this. I choose truth. I choose our name. I choose to be Inday Mamay, descendant of revolutionaries, even if it costs me everything." The words broke something open in Inday's chest. For years, she'd believed her role was to protect her children by staying small, staying quiet, staying invisible. But Dante was showing her a different way. Protection through truth, strength through integrity, legacy through courage. "All right," she said finally. "We continue. But we're smarter now. We protect each other. We document everything. And we prepare for worse to come." "Worse is definitely coming," Agent Mercado said. "But so is help. The story is spreading. News organizations want interviews. Indigenous rights groups are mobilizing support. Academic institutions are questioning the ethics review. You're not alone anymore." JP pulled up his laptop. "The documentary is back online. Enough people downloaded and re-uploaded it that they couldn't suppress it. It's been viewed 300,000 times now. People are organizing solidarity protests in Manila. What you started in these mountains is becoming a movement," Raphael said. "Every family with suppressed history, every community with buried truth, every person told to stay silent, they're watching what happens here. You're showing them that ordinary people can fight power and survive, or not survive," Inday said quietly. "Someone tried to kill me tonight." "Yes," Father Cruz agreed. "And that means we're dangerous to them. The mayor and Chen are desperate, and desperate people make mistakes. Our job now is to stay alive, stay united, and keep speaking until the world can't ignore us." They prayed together then. Not all of them were believers, but they needed the ritual, the moment of shared purpose. Inday found herself thinking of her great-grandfather, writing his final letter by candlelight, knowing he would die, but hoping his words would survive. "Truth echoes," she whispered. He promised it would echo. Outside, dawn was breaking over the mountains. The burial sites were legally protected now. The story was public. They had survived the night. But as Inday stood among her allies in the growing light, she understood this was only the beginning. The real battle, the battle for accountability, for justice, for lasting change, still lay ahead. The next morning brought unexpected reinforcements. A caravan of vehicles arrived in the village. Journalists, historians, indigenous rights activists, and protesters from Manila carrying signs, "Honor our heroes" and "Truth cannot be buried." Dante had spent the night making calls, leveraging every contact he'd built in his corporate career. "You wanted connections?" he told his mother. "I'm using them for something that matters." The media attention changed everything. Suddenly the mayor couldn't operate in shadows. Gen development found itself under scrutiny from environmental groups, anti-corruption watchdogs, and international human rights organizations. But the real shift came from an unexpected source. A young construction worker named Miguel approached Father Cruz with a terrified confession. He'd been ordered to take his bulldozer to the burial sites that afternoon and destroy them before the archaeological survey could begin. "They told me the heritage protection was just paperwork," Miguel said, twisting his cap in his hands. "They said if I did this one job, they'd pay me 6 months' wages. But I have kids. I can't be part of destroying graves." "Can I?" Agent Mercado moved fast. She got a federal injunction, called in police protection, and arranged for media to be present at the burial sites. If Chen's people tried to destroy evidence, it would happen on camera. By noon, they'd formed a human barrier at the primary burial site, Inday. Rafael, Jotpi, Maricel, Lola Celia, Father Cruz, Dante, and now dozens of supporters from the village and Manila. They stood in a line across the clearing where, according to Lola Celia's testimony and the map, at least 30 revolutionaries lay buried. JP live-streamed everything. Thousands watched in real time as the confrontation unfolded. At 2 o'clock, bulldozers arrived. Behind them, police vehicles and Chen's lawyers in expensive suits. The mayor stood at a distance, trying to maintain deniability. Victor Chen emerged from a Land Rover, his polished facade finally cracking. "You're trespassing on private property. Move or be arrested." "This is a protected heritage site," Agent Mercado called back, holding up federal documents. "Any attempt to disturb it is a criminal violation. These officers are here to enforce that protection." The police looked uncertain, caught between federal authority and local power. Inday recognized the sergeant. He'd been the mayor's high school classmate. "Agent Mercado has jurisdiction," the sergeant finally said. "This is a federal matter." Chen's face darkened. "You have no idea who you're dealing with. I have investors, government connections, legal resources that will crush all of you." "And we have the truth," Inday said, stepping forward. She was exhausted, homeless, threatened, but something unbreakable had crystallized inside her. "We have documents, burial sites, testimony, and the eyes of the nation watching." "You can't bulldoze that." "Watch me," Chen said. He gestured to the bulldozer operators. The machines roared to life, grinding forward. The human barrier held. People locked arms, planting themselves between the machines and the sacred ground. The bulldozers kept coming. 10 feet away. 5 feet, then they stopped. The operators shut off their engines and climbed down. "We're not running over people for your resort," one of them said to Chen. "Not for any amount of money." The moment hung suspended. Chen, furious and impotent, facing ordinary people who simply refused to move. Behind the barrier, Inday felt the weight of generations. Her great-grandfather and the revolutionaries he'd fought beside. Her grandmother who'd kept silent in fear. All the forgotten heroes whose graves they were protecting. "This is over," Agent Mercado said. "The sites are protected, the evidence is public, and criminal investigations are underway. Take your bulldozers and go." "You'll regret this," Chen said, but his voice had lost its certainty. He was a businessman who'd calculated wrong, betting that money and threats would overcome the inconvenient truth. As the bulldozers retreated, the crowd erupted in cheers. People hugged, cried, celebrated, but Inday felt something more complex than triumph. Relief, yes, but also awareness of how close they'd come to losing everything. The next week brought a cascade of developments. The National Historical Commission announced a full excavation and documentation of all burial sites. The preliminary archaeological survey confirmed human remains at multiple locations marked on Lakan Mamay's map. More dramatically, Agent Mercado's investigation uncovered irregularities in the land sale, forged environmental assessments, missing indigenous consultation records, bribes paid to municipal officials. Federal prosecutors filed charges against the mayor, several officials, and Chen personally. The mayor resigned, claiming health reasons. Chen fled to Singapore. The resort project was permanently cancelled. Maricel found new work with a transparency advocacy organization, her testimony against corruption making her a symbol of government whistleblowing. Raphael's university, facing public pressure, cleared him of ethics violations and offered him a tenure-track position. JP's documentary won awards and sparked a national conversation about historical erasure. But perhaps most significantly, the vault was officially designated a National Heritage Site. The government allocated funds to build a museum, managed by a committee that included Inday, Lola Celia, and representatives from mountain communities. 6 months after Kidlat led her to that vault, Inday stood at the dedication ceremony for a monument in the village square. The stone bore names, Lakan Mamay and 32 other revolutionaries, their graves now marked and honored. Families whose ancestors had been forgotten now had a place to grieve. To celebrate, to remember, Inday's children all attended. Dante, now proudly using Mamay as his surname again, and her 2 daughters, who had flown home from their jobs in Manila. Her grandchildren played around the monument, touching the carved letters of their great-great-great-grandfather's name. Lola Celia spoke at the dedication, her 97-year-old voice carrying across the crowd. For most of my life I kept silent about what I knew because speaking seemed impossible. But one woman and her stubborn goat showed me that impossible is just another word for difficult. Truth is difficult. Justice is difficult. Courage is difficult. But difficult is not impossible. When it was Inday's turn to speak, she stood before the monument bearing her great-grandfather's name and felt his presence like a blessing. "I'm not a hero," she began. "I'm a goat herder who followed her goat and found a door that should have been opened decades ago. But what I learned is that we don't need to be heroes to do heroic things. We just need to be willing to speak when silence is easier, to stand when sitting is safer, to remember when forgetting is more comfortable." She looked at her family, at the coalition who had fought beside her, at the community that had transformed through this struggle. My great-grandfather died, afraid he'd be forgotten. But his words were true. Truth echoes. It echoes through generations. It echoes through one woman reading his letter at a town hall. It echoes through young people filming and sharing and refusing to accept official lies. It echoes through all of us who choose to remember rather than forget. She touched the monument, the stone warm under her hand. This isn't an ending. It's a beginning. These names are just the start. There are other forgotten heroes, other suppressed stories, other communities still silent. What happened here shows it's possible to speak, possible to be heard, possible to win. The dedication ceremony continued with traditional dances, prayers from multiple faiths, and the presentation of the recovered artifacts now housed in the new museum. Kidlat, adorned with flowers for the occasion, bleated her approval. As the sun set over the mountains, Dante found his mother sitting apart from the celebration, looking at the peaks that held the now honored graves. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "That I'm tired," she admitted, "and that I miss my old quiet life sometimes, and that I'd make the same choices again. No regrets?" "Oh, many regrets. I regret that it took this long. I regret my grandmother died silent. I regret how much everyone sacrificed. But I don't regret fighting. I don't regret speaking," she smiled at him. "And I don't regret that my son finally knows who he comes from." Dante sat beside her. "I added Mamay back to my business cards. First meeting, someone asked about the name. I got to tell them about my great-great-grandfather, the revolutionary. About my mother who changed history with a goat," he laughed. It's a better story than Fernandez, which I picked because it sounded generic and safe. Safe has its appeal, Inday said. Maybe. But truth has its own power. They sat together as the celebration continued behind them and the mountains darkened into silhouette. The battle was won, but Inday knew the larger war, the fight for historical justice, for indigenous rights, for truth against power, would continue long after she was gone. But that was all right. She'd done her part. She'd opened the vault, spoken the truth, and survived. She'd shown that one invisible woman could become visible, that one voice could start an echo that spread across a nation, and maybe, just maybe, she'd honored her great-grandfather's legacy, not by being fearless, but by acting despite her fear. 6 months later, Inday stood in the small museum built beside the vault entrance. Glass cases displayed artifacts carefully preserved by professional conservators. Inday Mamay's journal, weapons from the revolution, the map that had changed everything. The vault itself remained as it had been, accessible through guided tours that taught visitors about the suppressed history of mountain revolutionaries. Inday served on the museum's management committee alongside Lola Celia, Agent Mercado, and representatives from indigenous communities throughout the region. She'd learned that being a historical figure meant meetings, interviews, and far less time with her goats than she preferred. But she'd also learned that visibility could be wielded like a tool. Her voice now carried weight in regional development discussions, heritage preservation debates, and curriculum decisions. The monument in the village square had become a pilgrimage site. Families came from across the Philippines to see ancestors' names carved in stone, to honor revolutionaries previously erased from history. The village had transformed too, not with Chen's resort, but with heritage tourism that respected and celebrated rather than exploited. Local guides, many of them young people, learned the true history and shared it with visitors. Jobs had materialized, but on the community's terms. Raphael taught at the university now, his dissertation published and acclaimed. He returned to the mountains frequently, working with communities to document oral histories before they were lost. His research had sparked a movement. Dozens of graduate students now worked on recovering suppressed histories throughout the Philippines. JP's documentary had won international awards and led to a streaming series exploring historical erasure across Southeast Asia. He'd become a voice for indigenous storytelling, using his platform to amplify marginalized voices. He joked that Kidlet deserved co-director credit. Maricel had found her calling as a transparency advocate, helping other whistleblowers navigate the dangerous path of exposing corruption. Her testimony in the mayor's trial had been devastating. Years of detailed documentation, finally used for justice rather than complicity. The mayor now served a prison sentence for fraud and corruption. Victor Chen remained in Singapore fighting extradition. His company had collapsed amid the scandal, its reputation destroyed. The resort land had been returned to public trust, designated as protected indigenous territory, but the most profound changes were personal. Dante had moved his family back to the province, starting a consulting business that connected Manila companies with rural communities for ethical development projects. He taught his children about their heritage, about Inday Mamay and Inday both, revolutionaries separated by a century, united by courage. Her daughters visited regularly now, no longer embarrassed by their mother's simple life, but recognizing its dignity. Her grandchildren played in the mountains, learning plant names and mountain paths, connecting to a heritage almost lost. Lola Celia, at 98, presided over community gatherings where elders shared stories previously kept silent. The unburdening had become communal, family after family revealing histories suppressed by fear. The museum had created an oral history archive, preserving these testimonies for future generations. Father Cruz's parish had grown, his moral stance during the crisis earning respect even from non-believers. The church now hosted regular forums on social justice, providing space for difficult conversations about power. history and truth. On this particular day, the museum was hosting a special event, the formal reburial of revolutionaries whose remains had been excavated from unmarked graves. After proper archaeological study and with full indigenous protocols, they would be interred in a memorial cemetery with individual headstones bearing their names. Families gathered. Some had known their ancestors were revolutionaries, but not where they were buried. Others had discovered connections they'd never known through the research. The ceremony blended Catholic, indigenous, and secular elements, honoring diverse traditions united by common purpose. Inday watched as coffins were carried in procession to the cemetery, each draped with the Philippine flag. Lakan Mamay's remains had been identified through forensic analysis and family records. His coffin, carried by Dante and his brothers-in-law, represented not just a man, but a movement, not just a death, but a reclamation. The burial ceremony was simple, but profound. A priest offered prayers. Indigenous elders performed traditional rites. A historian read excerpts from Lakan Mamay's journal. And Inday, as his descendant, spoke final words over his grave. "Great-grandfather," she began, her voice steady despite her emotion. "You died believing yourself forgotten, believing your sacrifice meant nothing. But you were wrong about that, as I hope you now see. Your words survived. Your truth survived. And through them you taught me, a simple goat herder who never imagined herself important, that every voice matters. Every truth deserves telling. Every person has the power to change history." She touched the coffin, feeling the weight of generations. "You're home now, among your people, honored as you deserved. And your echo continues, in every person who speaks truth when silence is easier, in every community reclaiming suppressed history, in every ordinary person who discovers they have extraordinary courage. Sleep well, ancestor. Your fight is finished. But what you started continues in those who come after." As earth fell on the coffin, Inday felt something release inside her. Grief, yes, but also completion. The circle had closed. The forgotten hero was remembered. The silenced voice was heard. The buried truth had surfaced. After the ceremony, as guests gathered for a communal meal, Inday slipped away to her rebuilt home. Dante and the community had constructed it in the traditional style, but with modern conveniences, a compromise between honoring the past and living in the present. Kidlat was there, older now and less inclined to wander. She'd become something of a celebrity. Tourists asked to photograph the goat who changed history. Inday found this absurd but endearing. Kidlat, for her part, accepted the attention with aristocratic indifference. "Well, old friend," Inday said, sitting on her porch with Kidlat beside her, "we've had quite an adventure." The goat looked at her with those strange horizontal pupils, and Inday could swear she saw understanding there. This creature, this stubborn escape artist, had led her to a destiny she'd never imagined. Had it been accident or something more? Inday didn't believe in fate exactly, but she believed in moments. Her phone buzzed. Another interview request, this one from an international news organization. She'd learned to be selective, to protect her energy. Being a symbol was exhausting. Sometimes she longed for her old invisibility. For days, when her biggest concern was Kidlat escaping, which seemed ironic now, and whether the rains would come in time for the mountain herbs. But then she thought of the families at today's ceremony, finally able to honor their ancestors. She thought of schoolchildren now learning true history instead of sanitized lies. She thought of communities across the Philippines being inspired to recover their own suppressed stories. She thought of her great-grandfather's words. Remember that ordinary people can stand against empires. She'd lived that truth, not because she was exceptional, but because she'd been willing to act when action was required. That was the real lesson. Not that heroes are special, but that ordinary people become heroes by choosing courage in moments that demand it. Her grandchildren appeared, running up the path from the ceremony. They wanted Lola Inday to tell them the story again, how Kidlat escaped, how she found the vault, how everything changed. Again. she protested, but she was smiling. "You've heard this story 100 times, but we like how you tell it," her youngest grandson said, settling at her feet. So she told it again. The way stories need to be told, passed down, repeated, embedded in memory through ritual retelling. She told them about the vault, about their ancestors' journal, about finding courage she didn't know she possessed. She told them about the betrayal and the burial, about secrets kept for a century, about the cost of silence and the power of speaking. She told them about allies who became friends, about a community finding its voice, about justice delayed but finally delivered. And she told them why it mattered, not just as history, but as instruction. Because there would be other vaults, other suppressed truths, other moments requiring ordinary people to make extraordinary choices. "Will you tell us this story when we're old?" her granddaughter asked. "I hope you'll tell it to your grandchildren," Inday said. That's how truth survives, through telling, through remembering, through refusing to forget. As the sun set over the mountains that held honored graves instead of hidden secrets, Inday sat surrounded by family, watched by a goat who'd started everything and felt at peace. Not because the work was finished, there would always be more work, but because she'd done what was required of her. She'd opened the vault her great-grandfather had sealed with his dying breath. She'd given voice to the silenced. She'd proven that even the most invisible person could become visible when they chose to stand. She was still a goat herder. She still lived in the mountains. She still collected herbs and worried about rain and fed her animals each morning. But now she also served on committees, gave speeches, advised on curriculum, and helped other communities navigate their own paths to historical justice. She'd thought finding the vault would change her life. She'd been right, but not in ways she'd imagined. The vault hadn't made her someone else. It had revealed who she'd always been, someone capable of courage, worthy of respect, descended from heroes and capable of heroism herself. Dante joined her on the porch after the grandchildren ran off to play. "Good ceremony today." "Yes, I've been thinking about names and legacy and what we pass down," he smiled. "My oldest asked if she could change her middle name to Mamay. She wants to carry it forward." Inday felt tears prick her eyes. A name nearly erased, reclaimed by choice rather than shame. "What did you tell her?" "I said yes. I said being a Mamay means something now. It means courage. It means standing for truth. It means we come from ordinary people who did extraordinary things." He paused. "I told her about you. About how you showed all of us what that looks like. I just followed a goat. No, Ma, you followed your conscience. The goat just showed you where to start." They sat in comfortable silence as night fell. Somewhere in the mountains, marked graves held honored dead. In the museum, artifacts told stories previously suppressed. In schools, children learned histories recently recovered. And in homes throughout the region, families spoke aloud what their ancestors had whispered in fear. Inday had lived 58 years in invisibility and 6 months in spotlight. She preferred the invisibility, honestly, but she wouldn't trade what she'd gained. Purpose, pride, connection to something larger than her small life. She'd learned that invisibility had been a kind of death, a slow erasure of self. Visibility was harder, more dangerous, more demanding, but it was also more alive. "Do you miss the quiet?" Dante asked, reading her thoughts. "Every day," she admitted, "and I wouldn't go back for anything." Kidlet stirred, stretching before settling back to sleep. The goat who'd escaped through a broken fence and led her owner to destiny slept peacefully now, her wandering days mostly behind her. Inday touched the goat's rough coat, thinking of all the accidents and choices that had brought them here. If the fence hadn't broken, if Kidlet hadn't wandered into that particular ravine, if Inday had turned back instead of following, if she'd kept the secret instead of speaking, so many small moments that had cascaded into transformation, personal, communal, national. That was the nature of change, she'd learned. Not dramatic gestures, but small, courageous choices that accumulated into movements. She was tired, bone-tired in ways that sleep couldn't cure, but she was also satisfied. Her great-grandfather's words had echoed across a century and found her. She'd amplified that echo, sending it forward to generations she'd never meet. Truth once spoken cannot be unspoken. It echoes. He'd been right about that. The truth she'd spoken couldn't be buried again. It would echo through textbooks and museums, through stories told and retold, through the lives of everyone who'd witnessed that an invisible mountain woman could change history. As stars emerged above the mountains, Inday Mamay, goat herder, vault discoverer, and likely revolutionary, sat on her porch and let herself simply be. Not a symbol, not a historical figure, not a guardian of legacy. Just a woman who'd done what needed doing, surrounded by the quiet beauty of mountains that held both burial and resurrection. Kidlet snored softly. The night sounds of the highlands sang their ancient songs. And in the darkness, Inday smiled. She'd followed her goat and found her great-grandfather. She'd found her voice and used it. She'd found courage and shared it. She'd found truth and refused to let it stay buried. That was enough. That was everything. The vault was open. The dead were honored. The living were free to remember, and one stubborn goat slept peacefully. Her work finally done. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.